Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started this afternoon to talk to you about protecting your sensitive information in Office 365 with data loss prevention. My name is Mas Libman. I'm on the Office 365 product group where I work on a variety of different solutions that are intended to help you protect your sensitive information, keep it secure, and ensure you have control and visibility of that content as it roams into the cloud and as you store it and keep it safe in Office 365. Now, as most of you are at a security conference, probably have a lot of familiarity with the fact that information, it's difficult to control, it has a life of its own, and leaks ultimately happen. And quite frequently, the leak of that sensitive information happens in an inadvertent way, meaning many times that sensitive information that you have is inadvertently placed somewhere where it shouldn't be, or an uneducated user shares or uses it in a way that they shouldn't have. And so, it's important that you have those controls so that you can make sure that your users understand when they should be using that sensitive information, where it's safe to share, and I'll show you a couple of ways that our DLP solution can help empower your end users to keep that content secure. And over the last year, we've invested in a variety of different capabilities within Office 365 DLP, from some additional insights that help assure your content is safe, even if you don't know where that content may reside. We'll help inform you that that information is stored up there. We've also provided a bunch of different tools to help you remediate incidents as you find or discover them. And then, of course, we understand that information doesn't just only live within Office 365. It often roams outside of your circle of trust. And so it's important to make sure that that information remains secure even outside of Office 365. Now, that's where, within Microsoft, we have the Microsoft Information Protection sort of umbrella of technologies and capabilities that we provide that are intended to help you protect that information as it roams and used across whether it's our Office cloud and our Office cloud or a third-party cloud such as Box or whatnot. For today, I'm going to zoom in really quick here to the Office 365 solution and our integration with Office client applications and how you can inform your users about that information that they're sharing. And actually, rather than show you a bunch of different slides and whatnot, I'm actually going to switch on over and show you what an end user experience looks like when they're using sensitive information. Now, I'm going to go ahead and switch on over to my desktop here where I'm logged in as a user in Office 365. And my organization has put into place a variety of different DLP policies that are intended to help make sure I use that information in a proper way, that it's compliant with my organization's security requirements. And so in this case, I have a OneDrive, for my OneDrive for Business folder. I have a bunch of different sensitive information that's been stored and shared in there. And actually, you can see on some of these, there's a little overlay icon that indicates something of interest relating to these different documents. And if I select this document, I can see that it's been shared with somebody outside my org, but it has this interesting icon on it. This icon tells me, hey, there's a problem with this document. It's subject to your organization's sensitive information policy, and it tells me why. Well, it's been shared with people outside my organization, and it has credit card data in it. Now, in this case, my organization has put into place a policy that makes sure credit card information isn't shared improperly. And in this way, now that when I'm in my in OneDrive, as I share that content, my organization's security policy is now right in front of me, informing me about the impact of that policy, where it's safe to share that information. And in this case, we're just warning the user. We're just telling them that information it may not be shared with the appropriate user, so that that user can take an educated decision to unshare that content or to tell their admin that it was an appropriate use of that sensitive information. Now, of course, when a user shares that information is also a very powerful way, oops, didn't mean to open that document, it's also a very powerful way for you to help inform your users and help educate them when their sharing of sensitive data, their collaboration outside of your organization is secure. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a quick example here. What I've taken is another file that I have in my OneDrive. In this case, it contains some transaction data and some credit card data. And I'm going to go ahead and share it with an external user. There we go. Spelled incorrectly, but nonetheless, it's still an external user. And here you can see right within the share dialog, right within OneDrive, there's a policy tip that's informing me that the information that I'm trying to share it contains sensitive information. I can't share it outside my organization. And if I click that view tip, I actually see that exact same information that I saw previously on another document that tells me why I can't share it. In this case, I can't share it because it contains credit card data. And there's also some additional controls that we give to the end user to help empower them as they're sharing that sensitive information. For example, they can report this as a false positive so that your IT staff, your administrators, as they're managing the policies in your organization, they understand that there may be an issue. They want to go fine-tune that policy and exempt this particular case. And there's also an ability, if the organization allows it, for the user to override that block. And so in this case, what's happened is the admin put a policy in place that says my users can't share sensitive information outside my org, except I'm going to give them an out. I'm going to let them override. But if they override, they have to give me a business justification. And so right here, in context, as I'm trying to share that information, I can actually type in the reason. This is a business partner, so they need to see the info. And then in real time, I can override this policy. And what's actually happened on the back end is there's a report that gets generated. There's an audit trail that's available that will inform my admin that somebody overrode my policy. But at the same time, me as an end user, I'm empowered to go continue to do my job. I'm not confused or don't understand why I can't go share that information. I don't have to go help desk and incur all the costs related to calling a help desk technician, having somebody investigate the issue. All of that end-to-end is right now encapsulated in empowering your end user. So they no longer have that confusion around why that may not be the case. And you, as an IT admin, have the control to say when your users can share that information or when are they allowed to override or not. And what's really powerful about Office 365 DLP and those policy tips is they're uniform and consistent regardless of where the user is sharing that data. So now I'm going to switch over. I'm that same user. I've got some sensitive information I've prepared to send to somebody. And in this case, I have it all pre-canned to kind of help package this up. But here you can see I have an email message. I've placed a bunch of credit card data already in it. And right here at the top, I can see a similar notification. This time, it's packaged in a way that's consistent with Outlook's UI, kind of the way they show notifications to user. But the information here is all the same. And so, for example, I can see that the reason I can't share this is because it contains credit card information. And I have the same ability to report it as a false positive that it appears in your admin reports and everywhere else so that you have visibility into when those happen. And similarly, I can actually override this. And as before, right within context of my email application. And this is a consistent experience whether you're in Outlook or Word or PowerPoint or Excel. The user has a consistent way that they can sort of interact with the system, understand how they're being protected, but also empower them to continue to share that sensitive data. So is another business partner. So once I click override, again, that gets recorded. I can send that message, and now it'll arrive to my intended recipients, and I can go upon my merry way. Now, behind the scenes, as DLP is running, if you're an end user and you happen to take an action that impacts a policy in your organization, you do have a way of, those notifications don't just live within the applications. There's actually email notifications that help inform your users. And I have an example here that actually just got triggered when I shared that sensitive information. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can open that up for you full screen so you can see the detail there. And in this case, this is actually very similar to the one that we use inside of Microsoft, where our IT staff has customized the message it's just normal standard HTML that you can use to customize this message, but they've used it to really provide the end user with a contextual experience about the violation, as well as sort of geared to Microsoft, or in this case, Contoso's organizational policies, links to find more information about the policies and whatnot. But what's super cool about these notification messages is, of course, that we have some built-in templatized data that you can use to insert into those messages so that your users have a little bit more context about this actual violation. It's not just a blank template that everybody gets. So you can see in this case the same message that I saw right in OA, right in Outlook, right in SharePoint, where this message was sent to people outside my organization. It contains sensitive information, credit card data, and actually a copy of the message has been attached to this. So if I did something wrong, if I want to go investigate it further, I can crack it open and take a look right away. Now, that's sort of the end user experience when they're using sensitive information that's been protected in Office by Office 365 DLP. Now I'm going to switch on over and show you what that admin experience looks like. And I'm starting off from what is the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. Now, if you open up the what we collectively call the waffle over here, you'll see that there is a security and compliance icon. Now, this is your one-stop shop for all things related to security and compliance in Office 365 as well as Microsoft 365. And so what I've done, I've actually customized this homepage so it's geared to me as a DLP admin and the things that I care about. I have a couple of different insights into some alerts that may have been happening in my organization. Unfortunately, as a test tenant or a demo tenant, I haven't generated enough hits to make those graphs look terribly exciting. But ultimately, these will inform me about what is the activity of DLP in my organization. How many messages or documents are getting protected? How many users are overriding them or indicating that it was a false positive? And I can drill into each of those and really find out specifically about what and why that information was shared and make sure it was an appropriate use. Now, to make all that happen, you first have to create a DLP policy. So what I've done here is I've zoomed in. I'm in the DLP node in the Security and Compliance Center. And here I have a bunch of different policies. And many of these are actually the ones that were protecting the content that I just showed you a couple of minutes earlier in SharePoint and OneDrive. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a new policy so you can understand at least some of the controls that we have there. Now within DLP, we provide about 85, 90 built-in sensitive types for common kinds of PII data, financial data, things like credit cards, social security numbers, IP addresses, and whatnot, a whole bunch of different data types for common kinds of sensitive information. And then we package those into a template. So for example, if you have a given financial regulation or medical or privacy-related regulation or control that you want to put in place, we've made it an easy starting point for you to go ahead and start protect that data. I'm going to go ahead and choose the HIPAA template that we recently updated just to show you some of the ways that these policies work. So in this case, I can see that this policy is going to look for PII data as well as medical terms and help inform me and help keep that data protected. That's a very common way that that's a very common way for HIPAA information to get shared. I'm trying to dismiss this wonderful, there we go. That's a common way for HIPAA information to get shared. HIPAA isn't a strongly typed ID. It's not like a credit card number where you can send that number through a checksum and make sure it's actually a credit card number. So we use a combination of different heuristics to really match that data and make sure it's a medical document or something that's likely subject to HIPAA. Now, when you turn on a DLP policy, you get to decide where you want to protect that content. By default, we make it easy for you to protect everywhere. But of course, you can zoom in and choose the specific locations. You can choose to protect everybody in your email, all the email in your organization, or you can scope that to specific groups or exclude different groups. And similarly for SharePoint and OneDrive, you can choose to protect all of your organizations. You can make this an org-wide policy, or you can apply this to certain users' OneDrive accounts, or to specific SharePoint portals that you use for external collaboration. So you really have the fidelity here to choose where that content is protected, where that policy is running and protecting that content. Now, not shown here, but something that we're working heavily on is, of course, additional workloads in Office. For example, support for Teams, Skype conversations, and a variety of different ways that information gets shared. Actually, due to the way that Teams stores its documents, it uses SharePoint and OneDrive on the back end. So if you have a DLP policy in place to protect those SharePoint sites or those OneDrive locations, DLP is actually already protecting that content that you're sharing over Teams. Now, once you've chosen where you want that information to be shared, you can choose the specific criteria that this policy uses to detect that information. So for example, here I can see that this is looking for PII terms and medical terms. And if I click Edit, I can actually zoom in and see the specific contexts that this policy is looking for, the combinations of data, the accuracy that it's looking for within that data. Is this a loose match or is this a very high accuracy match? And I can actually fine-tune this if I'd like. I could choose a different confidence level if I'd like to have a much more stringent match of, for example, a social security number. Or I could add additional types of sensitive data, or I could even use labels as another way for me to trigger content. So now something that if you're familiar with Azure Information Protection, where when you're authoring documents in Word, PowerPoint, or Excel, and your users start labeling that content as confidential, highly confidential, personal, whatever your organization needs, you'll be able to extend that and monitor for that and actually put in additional controls in Office 365 DLP so that you can assure that content, again, is shared in the proper places and that you have visibility into where and how it's being shared. Now, within the policies, you have a whole bunch of control around what the specific criteria that you're looking for. As I mentioned, you can create groups of different content. In this case, we're actually looking for any term that's a PII identifier in combination with a term that's one of our large dictionaries of medical terms. And if we find that, we'll trigger a match for this policy. And if I'd like, I could actually add additional sensitive types. And really quick, you can see that we have a whole bunch of different ones that we include out of the box. And it's not letting me scroll at the moment. And you also can upload and import your own custom sensitive type. So if you have your own business ID, your own formatting of data, your own patent records and different heuristics that you want to use, you can import those into the system and use them in combination with our sensitive types. You can replace our sensitive types. So you have the full flexibility there to choose how you want that to be invoked. Actually, I'm going to cancel out of these saves so I can show you the next step. Once you've configured a policy on the criteria, the context when you want this trigger to apply, in this case, I'm only going to tell my users when they're sharing this data outside. I don't want to nag them or bother them when they're just using it in a day-to-day and they haven't been shared it. And now I can choose what is that interface that I want my users to see. Do I want to educate them and tell them about this organization's policies? That's through the policy tip. And I can fully customize who sees that policy tip as well as what appears in the policy tip. You can customize the email text that I showed you earlier as well as that tip that appears right in the UI, in Outlook, in OA, in SharePoint. So you can give them a very appropriate message based upon the language your organization uses and the way you talk about your sensitive data. You can, of course, turn on additional controls. You can send admin alerts so that your admin can be notified when sensitive information has been shared. And you can choose who receives that alert, as well as what appears in the alert. And so in this case, we've included all of the different sensitive information that's included, but you can fine-tune what type of PII data do you want your tiered investigators to look at. Do you want to give them a copy of the content that was shared, or do you just want to tell them a little bit about the sensitive information that may have been in that document? And then, of course, last but not least, you can choose to put in those enforcement blocks. Block the user from sharing the content. Don't let them share it. And that's where, for example, here you can choose what is the scope of who gets blocked. Do I want to block them from sharing with anyone or just people outside my organization? Do I want to empower them to override that? Do I want to trust them that they know what they're doing, but I don't want to get in their way? And of course, what constraints do you want to put around that override? Do you want to require a business justification? Do you want to make it easy if they happen to report it as a false positive? You can automatically override that. And ultimately, when these controls are what enforces that experience as they're in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all the different Office client applications. But at the same time, we always have server-side analysis and enforcement. So even if your users happen to be in a version of Outlook that doesn't have our policy tip enforcement, or they happen to figure out a way that they think to bypass our system, our service is always running, always checking for those different things and informing you when that detection may have occurred. Now, when you turn on a policy, you have a couple of different controls that you can choose. One of the really powerful tools that we have is our test mode. And what's great about this is you can actually turn on this policy and kind of get a what if, how bad is the situation, where is that sensitive information getting shared without impacting anybody, without blocking sharing, without starting to warn users about something that they're not ready to contend with. So you can put this into test mode and really get a sense of what is the lay of the land, and then slowly turn on that enforcement and that protection as you fine-tune the policy and you scope it to the exact types of matches that you want. Now, before we wrap up here, I just want to switch on over and show you what some of that admin experience looks like. So you as an admin, as your users are sharing that data, and as I mentioned earlier, there's I shared some sensitive information that triggered an alert that my admin wanted to know about. There's a couple of different ways that those can appear in the experience, and I'm trying to open one right now. So for example, just trying to find the notification that I wanted. So in this example, I've taken some content. This happened a couple of months ago, but ultimately this is similar to what you would see when a user shares content. You'll get an alert that'll tell them about that information, about the information that was shared, all the context around where it was shared, the location that it was shared from, the type of data that was in it. And so all that information is now available in this email alert so that you can understand if it was an appropriate use of that information or if it was perhaps a violation. You should go follow up with the user and go investigate. Now, if you happen to have our alerting feature, you can also turn on DLP triggers for those alerts. And what will happen then is, for example, if your admin will receive a slightly different way that those notifications happen. For example, in this case, you'll notice that the the formatting of this email looks a little bit different. There's slightly different information that's available. I can see that there was a DLP policy match. It was a low severity. This triggered my policy because it had some sensitive data, but I need to go click investigate to go find out a little bit more about that. And what's great about that is that it brings you into the Security and Compliance Center. And I'm going to go ahead and show you where that takes you. Oops. And what you'll get is, it'll take you right into the alert in Office 365 in the Security and Compliance Center about that given violation, about the content that was shared, as well as what actions were taken, what was the severity of the alert. And there's some actions that you can now take. You can start to investigate it, you can track it, you can state, oh, this was a false positive. And so you can now record that. If it comes up again, you can go see that this was a false positive, and that's all recorded and available for you. To track over time. So if you happen to come back to this document, come back to this investigation, you'll see right in the text here, there's some comments that I've left about that. And again, if you're on the alerting dashboard, you'll see there's a variety of different ways that the alerts are surfaced. You have some customized ways to really surface the fact that these events are happening in your organization. And we have a rich set of reports that show you that activity. And I'm just going to click on in very quickly and show you what that looks like, I think. Now, this is the reporting homepage, which shows all of the different reports across the Security and Compliance Center. I'm going to zoom into the policy match report that I have here. And what this will show me here in a moment is an activity graph. What were the types of activities and actions and different policy violations that may have occurred in my organization? And I have the ability to scope this to a specific policy so I can investigate a very unique different circumstance. I can scope this to specific surfaces or different actions. So for example, I can scope this to only the cases where the messages were blocked or where the user overrode the violation. And then, of course, we have what are called insights and recommendations. So in this case, one of the insights is noticed that there's a repeat user that's been violating this policy. I can actually click in, and this is going to tell me a little bit more about, well, who is this user? Me. I've been repeatedly violating this policy. I may want to go take a look and investigate and make sure that they're educated on our organization's policies. And again, we have a variety of different insights and recommendations that we're surfacing here. This is just one example, and there's a whole bunch that we have coming on our roadmap. I'm about at time here, so I think I'll wrap up. I will be at the information protection booth that's right behind me here from about 3 to 6, both today and tomorrow. If you'd like to drop on by, have some specific questions about Office 365 DLP or how we interop with across the Azure and Microsoft ecosystem, by all means, come on by, and great to hear your questions and hear your feedback. Awesome. Thanks.